population as a whole. So incidence levels are really high and rising. You must assume at this point that you're infectious and that the other people you come into contact with are potentially infectious.
Meanwhile, education stakeholders will meet over the Christmas holidays as planning continues for the safe reopening of schools in January. A review of public health supports is to take place, which will examine mechanisms and response times in the event of an outbreak. General Secretary of the INTO, John Boyle, says they will follow public health advice when it comes to reopening next month.
If public health make a decision that schools have to close, well, nobody really wants to go back to remote learning. Neither the children, the teachers, nor the families, I would reckon, would want to be going back to that space. But if it has to happen, teachers stepped up to the plate last year with very creative lessons online.
From St Stephen's Day, nightclubs in the north will be ordered to shut and a maximum of 6 people will be allowed to dine or drink together. Stricter rules on face coverings and regular workplace testing is also being mandated following record levels of infection there today. Health Minister Robin Swan says the Stormont executive would have liked to go further but needs more financial support from London.
I will say solely from a public health perspective, the precautionary approach would have been to impose much more severe restrictions right now. All other things being equal, the executive would have gone further today. However, all things are not equal.
Extending rent controls nationwide would be a disaster, according to a landlord lobby group. Earlier, Housing Minister Darragh O'Brien told News Talk that the 2% cap on rent increases in rent pressure zones could potentially be rolled out nationwide. Margaret McCormack from the Irish Property Owners Association says rents are currently too low to encourage landlords not to sell.
The system has penalised the landlords that kept their rents low. There's no mechanism to bring low rents to a sustainable level. So we are losing people. People are actually leaving the market. They're serving notice on their tenants.
And workers at Irish Rail have backed industrial action over antisocial behaviour. Members of the National Bus and Rail Union voted in favour of the move by a margin of 77%. That's it for now. More in an hour.
News Talk weather.
Thanks to Ryanair. Last minute shopper? Don't stress. Give them the gift of travel with a Ryanair gift card.
Cloudy and wet tonight with rain in the south and west extending nationwide and turning heavy at times. Lows of 7 to 11 degrees. Now you're up to date on News Talk.
The Newsround on Off the Ball
with Gillette. Put your best face forward with our new and improved razors.
This is News Talk.
Hello there, you're very welcome along to this evening's Off the Ball cracking show. Lined up this evening, we have two of the heavyweights of European football journalism to review the year that was between 9 and 10. Graham Hunter and Philippe Auclair together between 9 and 10. They will get through it all, the good, the bad and the ugly. So tune in for that. It will be a chat worth tuning in for. Mick Foley of the Sunday Times. I think we're all pretty down in the main on the Football Championship 2021. Was it that bad? The GAA men's football year that was being discussed with Mick Foley of the Sunday Times this hour. After 8 o'clock, Wednesday Night Rugby, Rory O'Connor of the Irish Independent and Chris Jones as well, the BBC's rugby correspondent. Frankly, it is starting to feel as if Irish rugby is just about the only country really interested in the Heineken Champions Cup. We will get Chris's UK perspective, see how they're feeling about things. And more besides. 53106 is the text number. We're at Off the Ball on Twitter. Richie McCormack, good evening to you.
How are you, Joe?
And Ronan Mullen, hello to you.
Hi, Joe.
So, that was a fairly negative way of selling the show, wasn't it? Graham Hunter, Philippe Auclair. Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Mick Foley, was the Football Championship as bad as we all feel? Wednesday Night Rugby, does nobody care about the Heineken Champions Cup? It does feel, Ronan, as if the world is fraying here slightly.
Yeah, well, they said it couldn't be done, Joe. Graham Hunter and Philippe Auclair at the same time on the same football show. It's one of the great collaborations of modern times, I'd say, up there with Kanye and Jay-Z when they went on tour together. But listen, the lucky viewers who were on YouTube earlier would have seen it, but the listeners will have it from 9 o'clock. But yeah, it's kind of after the high points of, maybe you looked at the latter point of the Euros and the early part of the Premier League season, for example, where full crowds and I think people were getting back to some semblance of normality and enjoying that, and you know, it was kind of true of all sports to a certain extent when the old vibes of crowds and the product is living up to those, that I think most were quite happy. But as you said, it's as we approach year's end, there is a kind of stinging sense of a recurring nightmare about the whole thing, that possibly we were in for more doom and gloom on the other side of January.
Yeah. Philippe and Graham is coming your way between 9 and 10. Full disclosure, we've recorded that chat already. The lads are brilliant on just so many things, and a touch negative at times, but really compelling listening. So tune in for that. I will still be here to keep you updated on the Carabao Cup, which does include Liverpool, Leicester this evening, and Spurs against West Ham, as well as Chelsea, Brentford. So that's on the way between 9 and 10. On the GAA Championship, I suppose what's really fueling the sense of dismay is that there was a real glimpse into the possibilities of the future around Proposal B, and that's been squarely knocked back. And just reminding myself, Richie, of some of the early stages of the Football Championship in advance of talking to Mick. So, for instance, Mayo 520, Leitrim 11 points. That was a 24-point hammering. We had Meath 422, Longford 12 points, 22-point hammering. We had Limerick 418, Waterford 12 points and 18 points hammering. Kerry, well, they dished out a few beatings to Clare. They beat Clare by 17 points, a good Clare side. And then most disappointingly of all, the Munster final after the Cork ambush the previous year. Kerry 422, Cork 1-9, a 22-point defeat. And even in Ulster, there were a few not great games. Armagh, Antrim, Armagh winning by 13 points. But in the main, Ulster was the saving grace, I think, for the vast majority of the championship. Obviously, the semi-finals were amazing. Final, little less so. But for the vast majority of the football championship, I remember a lot of Mondays. Distinctly remember Paddy Andrews one Monday, and we were just saying, there's nothing to talk about this weekend. We've had 3 or 4 games. There's nothing in them.
The amount of times you mentioned as well, and I don't think it's just you. This is a common refrain around the country was, well, we kind of have to wait until it gets to quarterfinals, semi-finals, and then we'll see the real football championship. And then outside of Dublin and Mayo, that never really materialised either. And I think that's what let a lot of people down, is that if it wasn't for the drama surrounding Tyrone and the will they won't they's of their appearances later in the championship against Kerry, wasn't it? It's hard to make a case for it being memorable in any way, shape or form outside of that Mayo Dublin game. There's literally I don't know how anybody can look at the championship as it is now, especially the way the results have trended, like you mentioned there, over the past 3, 4, 5 years and beyond, and think that is a workable solution to going forward with Gaelic football. It's clearly not. And it'd be interesting to see what is made of we've gone from Proposal A and Proposal B, I believe, to green and red, I think it is. We've got colour-coded proposals going forwards. To maybe that makes a difference. Maybe people have more of an inkling towards a specific colour. They're more biased towards a green than they will be a red, etc. But something needs to happen, and people need to actually get the bull by the horns and stop looking after self-interests. There was a key line I thought came out the other day, was that they're not going to focus as much on replays in the GAA anymore, because the GAA wasn't about making money, it's about providing games, and that's the main thing that they need to look forward, is to have those games that they do provide be actually worth watching, because like I mentioned here before, it's a product, and it's a product that's going to be increasingly difficult to sell to rights holders, especially if the football championship is as gack as it has been for the past while.
Yeah, God, red's an interesting colour choice. Who's going to vote for something red? I mean, who wants code red right now? Need a more enticing colour there, I think. Ulster ain't voting for it either way, Ronan. That's the point. They were doing just fine. They had a grand summer up there, as the rest of the country had fairly miserable game after miserable game. So that's one of the big problems, trying to get anything over the line.
Yeah, in theory, the Ulster Championship is the paradigm that everyone would like to follow if, the teams were competitive enough, and it was almost borne out in the previous championship by Cavan winning it. And granted, I know Tipperary did something similar down in Munster, but there is a genuine sense that when everybody has their house in order, that Ulster is thoroughly competitive. And even that Antrim game you mentioned, Antrim were able to hang with Armagh for swathes of that game in a way that Leitrim and these teams against behemoths of the game just simply can't and never will be able to. So again, to your earlier point, the notion that we're recycling these issues again and going straight back into them, it kind of typifies where things are at. But I was struck by some of the tones last night on the GAA as a whole. There were obviously keen stories that did emerge, and the Mayo beating Dublin, I was kind of leaning towards Kieran Cunningham's sense of it. And granted, I can't speak for those of Mayo, but getting that Dublin monkey off their back did seem like a seminal moment, and one that sort of it doesn't outstrip the non-winning of the All-Ireland, but if DVDs were still being made, Joe, I think there would be a DVD made of finally getting over that hurdle. So in that sense, that was a memorable one.
Yeah, well, Mick Foley of the Sunday Times is going to join us this hour and give us his thoughts and all that. And then after 8, so I mentioned the Heineken Champions Cup. Now, to be fair to this tournament, the pandemic is affecting it very badly. It's not its best self. Postponing games is not an option, although at the weekend games were postponed because the French government imposed stiffer restrictions and they couldn't have 5 games suddenly cancelled. So those French ones have been postponed. But nonetheless, there's just a sense of drift with this tournament. Donal Lennon had a very interesting piece in the Irish Examiner today where he was talking about death by 1,000 cuts. And, the new pool format has diluted the tournament, was his opinion. We were drip-fed these 2 games pre-Christmas, and it's just not enough to get into, really. And then he was talking about the wider issue, which is how much do the non-Irish clubs, teams care about this competition increasingly? He was arguing it's fading in their consciousness, and he was using examples. Castres, for instance. Castres, they fielded a diluted side in both games thus far against Harlequins and Munster. And then Montpellier travelled to Exeter in round 1. Most of their frontline stars rested, and they were stuffed by 42 points to 6. And the French teams increasingly have an agreement to rest players more often across the season. And several of those clubs are just using Europe to do it. I mean, we know Racing will go for it. We know Toulouse will go for it. And I think largely because of O'Gara. La Rochelle are into this competition as well. Beyond that, not really. And then, well, Chris Jones of the BBC is going to join us and give us a sense of where the English clubs are with this. Now, admittedly, Saracens have won a whole batch recently and Exeter won as well. So maybe that's slightly unfair. But Leicester, even though they've won 2 for 2, they've rested a bunch of players. There's a sense that the salary cap is going down. So to what extent the English teams will feel capable of challenging on both fronts in the short term is a question mark. Pat Lam talking about how clubs won't survive another lockdown. So all of these things are brewing. And what prompted me just to have this chat with Chris is I was at a family thing on Saturday and I was sort of saying, the Munster match is on now, we stick it on. And I was on my lonesome. And one of the remarks was, what's the point? French team don't care. Who are they playing? Castres. They don't care about it. It was such a damning mood from the room. What is the point of watching Munster Castres?
Well, what's the point about Munster Castres is there seems to be a sense that this competition, or at least the pool stages of this year, are going to bite the dust because there's no way that these postponed games can be rearranged, or at least there's no window for them to be rearranged. But I think the talk of drift has been a long one for English clubs in particular, because their bread and potatoes has always been the Premiership, and the money generated from that, from TV revenue, has been more worth to them than European rugby has. Similarly to the top 14, I mean, the money that's ploughed into the French league is exorbitant compared to what United Rugby Championship clubs can stand to earn. So their preference has always been to look after their own house before they go into Europe. The way that the tournament has unfolded and the way that it has kind of collapsed in upon itself, and these last 2 years of major disruption have done it no favours. But I don't think the French or the English were particularly keen to begin with.
No, they weren't.
But at least
I just wonder
for the last
if
few
it's more
years.
pronounced now. Yeah, I just wonder if it's more pronounced
now. It is that thing you mentioned last week of like how many teams can feasibly win the Champions Cup. Like, that's very real. Like, there's no team from Scotland are going to win the Champions Cup over the next while. Welsh Rugby has spoken about in the last 3-4 days how they, like you mentioned Pat Lam saying they can't handle another lockdown. The Dragons chairman was on Twitter the other night, Bernard Jackman retweeted him, saying that that they can't, their games at the weekend, their Interpro derbies are gone behind closed doors effectively. I think they're allowed to have really paltry crowds at them. They can't survive that. Like, the Welsh clubs, they really depend on live gates. They really depend on the money that they do get. So to have long periods of that matches is it's going to kill them. But none of those Welsh teams are going to win the Champions Cup anytime soon. They might win a Challenge Cup. So effectively what we're left with is Leinster, maybe Munster. Ulster might get to the table at some point again. And then, one of the Premiership clubs and then 2 French. It's a long route and a convoluted route and an often pointless route to get there. So perhaps it needs the injection of these South African teams down the line in the next few years. But something needs to happen to that competition. And I don't think this Swiss format. And by the way, this should be a warning to anybody without wanting to compare apples and oranges. This should be a warning to the people looking forward to the Champions League the next few years, because we're going to see a similar pool stage and it's going to be similarly rubbish, whereby the amount of pool games are condensed, and it's not a straight ahead league. The format hasn't helped surely.
No, it definitely hasn't. And look, I guess this Welsh regions and the Scottish clubs were never really big contenders in this competition, but something does feel a bit more pronounced now. So Chris Jones on the way, Rory O'Connor as well after 8 o'clock. We should start the news round, which as usual is brought to you by Gillette. Put your best face forward with our new and improved razors. Richie, Carabao Cup this evening.
Oh yeah, semi-final lineup is going to be confirmed tonight. Liverpool entertain Leicester, and there's a rare start for Caoimhín Kelleher, just his third of the season between the posts for Liverpool. That's one of 3 quarter-finals, down for decision. Tonight the other 2 are London derbies, with Brentford hosting Chelsea and Tottenham at home to West Ham. The semi-final draw, which also contains Arsenal, will take place after tonight's matches, all of which kick off at 7:45.
We'll keep an eye on those throughout. How are your Carabao Cup excitement levels, Ronan?
Well, it's a reasonably big night for Caoimhín Kelleher, isn't it? Like, I was kind of despondent on his behalf that he didn't get a run out against AC Milan in the Champions League that night, and while it was an utter dead rubber and other players got their chance, the likes of Tyler Morton, who's since got on and got his head in the league there last weekend. So I thought he was a bit unfortunate there. And this is, people like to downplay the Carabao Cup. It falls at an inopportune time, obviously, where people's minds are elsewhere at the moment. And Liverpool are down some key personnel, even withstanding the rotation that comes with this competition. But he'd like to sort of stake his claim for, like, almost a reminder that he's still, around the place. And Alisson, who's like relatively untouchable, I would say 99%, so has had a few gaffes this season. So it's not as if he's totally immune from criticism. So hopefully Kelleher can have a good night. And again, like, as much as the Carabao Cup is probably undervalued, I think it's all Premier League teams left now, given that Sunderland have exited. So I think there's a first chance for silverware, and Leicester in particular, having won the FA Cup last year, probably fancy their chances of getting a result tonight.
Yeah, updates across the evening. Meanwhile, Richie, IRFU new chief executive has been named.
Yeah, and he is Kevin Potts. He says the reviews into the women's game will be one of his first challenges in the role. He's been confirmed as Peter Brown's successor following what the union described as an extensive international recruitment process. Potts joined the IRFU in 2005 and he's been chief operating officer since 2015. 2 reviews, of course, ongoing into women's rugby, with further high-ranking discussions due in the new year, according yesterday to Minister of State for Sport Jack Chambers.
Meanwhile, Declan Kidney.
Yeah, speculation continuing to mount that Declan Kidney could be returning to Munster. He's played those rumours today with a straight bat. The province's former head coach has been linked with a director of rugby position following news that Johan van Graan is leaving for Bath next season. Director of rugby at London for the last 3 years, Kidney acknowledged the speculation today while neither distancing himself from it or otherwise. Alan Quinlan played under Kidney during his time at Munster and could see the benefit in a return.
I think he was brilliant at organising loads of stuff away from the rugby field and managing structures and central to a lot of change that happened in the whole organisation throughout his time, particularly the first time he was head coach. He's really shrewd at that. He's a former school teacher. We felt like schoolboys at the start. I certainly did, and I had to be kept in line by him. But I think there's a real decency around Declan, and he gets people and he tries to understand people, and the environment is really, really important to him. And that can be difficult for a head coach sometimes when there's so many moving parts around, and it brings added pressure. And I think a setup like this for Munster would, in my opinion, work very well.
Yeah, interesting one. We'll ask Chris Jones what he's made of how Kidney has done at London Irish as well over the last 3 years. I mean, regardless of what Munster do next, Ronan, this sense of drift, I think, is the thing they have to address. They've just lost too many members of the coaching staff over the last number of years.
Yeah, and even like the Erasmus departure wasn't foreseen either. And, it has been a sense, even since Kidney left, almost of trying to steady the ship in a far-reaching sense. And one of the things in Keith Earle's autobiography, beyond all the extraordinary detail in it, was just a remark about that need for consistency, that he feels Munster have too much chopping and changing at the top of the team. And hopefully one thing Kidney would promised in that regard is that stability and a sense that there's a plan in place. So whether it's him or someone of his ilk, I think that would be the route to go down. Someone who's willing to maybe, in practice and in theory, like set a stall out for something of a 5-year plan. And I know Munster fans probably don't want to hear that it's another restart or kicking things off from a fresh scratch. But I think that is probably what's required for the new candidate.
Rich, bunch of new contracts signed today?
Yeah, Finlay Bealham signing a new 2-year deal with Connacht. The tight head will remain at the sports ground until at least the summer of 2024. Bealham joined Connacht in 2011, having moved to Ireland from Australia the year prior. However, Connacht number 8, Abraham Papali, is set to leave the province for Brive in the summer. Sammy Arnold's already confirmed he's doing just that. Billy Burns and Marty Moore signing new 2-year deals with Ulster today. They're going to remain at Kingspan Stadium until at least the summer of 2024, while Geordie Murphy has penned a new 1-year deal with the province. The trio's extensions add 2 new 2-year deals announced yesterday for Tom O'Toole, Matty Ray and James Hume.
Now, interesting story this. So Barcelona are just over $1 billion in debt, but hey, what's 55 mil?
Yeah, they have reportedly agreed a deal with Barcelona. Manchester City have to sell Ferran Torres. The 21-year-old will join Barca for €55 million plus 10 million in potential add-ons. Torres only joined City from Valencia in August of last year, with the Premier League club set to make a profit of in and around €20 million. Barcelona helped out, no doubt, by the refinancing of their debt with Goldman Sachs back in the summer, which has earned them somewhere in the region of 500 million.
Yeah, we'll touch on that with Graham Hunter after 9 o'clock. He's alongside Philippe Auclair reviewing the footballing year. Ferran Torres is a good player as well, Ronan. He was very good for City in one of the opening games of the season. I think it was against Spurs in that game that they ultimately lost. Not that it was his fault. And for Spain over the past year, he's been excellent and scored a bunch of goals. So I'm kind of surprised City are willing to part ways with him. €55 million, not nothing, admittedly.
That's it. Like, Barcelona apparently have no money and yet are splashing the cash in this vein. I know there's been a few question marks over how exactly the financing is going to work. Dermot Carrigan, among others, have been possibly querying how the breakdown will work, given they have to have some outgoings also just to make the registration work. But yeah, it's an interesting one. Like that game, I just remember Gary Neville waxing lyrical about Ferran Torres, saying this was when the Harry Kane transfer rumour mill was still in the zeitgeist, and Neville was expressly saying they don't need a striker if Ferran Torres keeps playing like this. He was making those sort of cute, like out to in runs, these kinds of things, almost to an end whereby you think Guardiola had been coaching him and working as under the pretense almost that he could be moulded into a number 9. And as you said, he's banged the goals in at international level, so certainly not the end. How could it ever be when you're going to Barcelona? But I think Ferran Torres will be in this bracket of players who just tried the Premier League, can be reconfigured as a top player in La Liga, and I'd be surprised if anything else happens, to be honest.
Yeah, still only 21 years of age. Meanwhile, League of Ireland, Rich?
Yeah, a rare moment of common sense down in Waterford. Ian Morris says he's done plenty of background checking on the club. He's become the Blues' 4th permanent boss in 18 months, replacing Mark Bircham today. Morris, of course, led Shelbourne to the First Division title this year before being replaced by Damien Duff. While Canadian international Chris Twardek is poised to rejoin Bohemians, the 24-year-old left Bohs for Jagiellony Białystok in Poland after only 8 months in Wizbra. Twardek joined Slovakian side FK Shenica in the summer, but has reportedly agreed a multi-year deal at Bohs. Keith Long's side have already confirmed the signing today of Tampa Bay Rowdies midfielder Jason Doherty.
The darts is very much up and running meanwhile.
Yeah, it is. Willie O'Connor from Limerick has set up a 3rd round meeting with former finalist Michael Smith at the World Darts Championship. The Magpie beat world number 24 Glenn Durant today in something of an upset. 3-0 was the margin of victory for O'Connor. Among tonight's highlights, another former runner-up, Simon Whitlock, takes on the Dutchman Martin Clairmaker.
And then just last story or two, Rich, whatever you want to take us.
Yeah, Ireland's historic tour of the United States is underway and is going pretty well so far. They are taking on their hosts in the first of 2 T20 internationals. The United States are 12 for 3 off the first 4 overs of their innings. 2 wickets for Barry McCarthy, 1 for Simi Singh. Things going very, very well for Ireland so far. And a return to Leinster for Tanya Rosser, who says she's super excited to become the new Leinster women's head coach. She succeeds even Phil DeBarra, the former Irish international, had a decade-long spell with the province as a player.
Okay, very good. Richie McCormack, thank you.
Merry Christmas to all.
Indeed. Ronan Mullen, Merry Christmas to all.
Yeah, same to you, lads.
Thanks, fellas.
All you
need for Christmas.
News Talk's Christmas cash machine.
Oh, get in there!
Oh, thank you. Oh my God, I can't believe it.
Your chance to win big.
Now, congratulations to Rhys O'Malley in Drogheda, won over €15,000 in the Christmas cash machine today. Now, our new total is €17,256.81. Text the word play to 57599. Get your entry in by 3 o'clock tomorrow. And Kieran Cuddihy could be calling you back. Answer the phone within 5 rings and the money is yours. So remember that amount again, €17,256.81. Text the word play to 57599. Over 18s only. Text